Hello everyone, we have Melanie Shimano talking about students, Python, engaging communities, and improving them. Thank you.
So how can students use Python to engage with and improve their communities? As we know, there's new technology that's being created every single day. We're all here because we know that it's important for students and people in general to know how to do all this stuff. So there's a lot of resources out there, and the internet is making it a lot easier for people to understand those fundamentals. So if you search Learn Python into Google, you have over 4 million results in videos. That's not even including any tutorials, any books, any other programming languages, anything else in the STEM fields. So this is awesome. This is definitely necessary. As we've seen in people's talks already, it's really important to understand those fundamentals, understand why you can use them. But one thing that's really hard to convey, I think, in learning stuff online in tutorials and learning stuff in videos is understanding why it matters. So we've heard a little bit in some talks earlier today about how you can apply things in real life and how you can apply things past just the fundamentals of coding, how you can use it in chemistry, how you can use it in literature, how you can use it in maths, and physics and all this stuff. So how do we convey this into things past videos and past learning the fundamentals? So I've tried to do this by building food computers with my students. And so these are what food computers are. As you can kind of see, they're essentially boxes that are tabletop hydroponic greenhouses that are climate controlled with Raspberry Pi. And so my students build all of this. We grow some food inside of it, and they get to see kind of that physical aspect of how technology matters and how they can start to apply it to their real life. So I'll explain a little bit about how this works, but first to talk about food computers a little bit. So this concept was come up with by this group at the MIT Media Lab called Open Agriculture. And I first heard about it when the founder gave a TED Talk. I thought it was super cool. In my experiences in entrepreneurship and engineering, I felt like a lot of people's default reactions to solutions is creating something like an app or creating a website, which is definitely necessary a lot of times, but also a lot of times kind of like a band-aid solution to things. Like it can help solve something in the interim, but maybe doesn't get to the root of the problem. And so I think the food computers give us a way to better explore what that technology does, and kind of gives us a way to learn past the screen and see more into the physical world. So we all know Raspberry Pi, Arduino, microbit, all that stuff helps us do stuff in real life. So how do we keep on interacting with that? And their message resonates with me as well. So their message, the reason why they kind of made the food computers is because we know that the world population is expected to be almost 10 billion people by the year 2050, most of those people living in urban areas, but our food systems and the infrastructure for that isn't really set up to be able to support that system, be able to support that many people in that type of environment. So how can we solve this problem? We know that it's not going to be one person. We know that it's not going to be even just one institution of collective minds. It's going to need to be a bunch of different people from a bunch of different areas who come together with different perspectives and solve this problem together. So the open sourced their food computer code and the instructions of it, so you can go on GitHub and see what they've done. They've made some build videos to help you get a better perspective about how to build it if you're new to technology, if you're new to Python, if you're new to coding in general. You can kind of download the code and implement one of these things yourself. So I think this is super cool. This is kind of what their main model looks like. And so as I mentioned, it's open source, so there's a bunch of people around the world who've attempted to build one of these food computers. So there are a bunch of different versions. So basically, you can see it's hydroponics, which means it's grown without soil, it's grown with water. There's a basin here. There are plants that are growing out of it. There are sensors everywhere. There's nutrients that are going in. There's grow lights at the top. We're basically trying to mimic an outside environment inside to talk about kind of how we can use computer coding to grow plants. And so you can see a lot of stuff here, and this is super cool. We can get a better idea of plant characteristics and understand what makes plants grow faster, what makes plants taste sweeter, what makes plants have wider leaves and stuff like that. So this is super cool. The only problem with this is that it costs about $4,000 US to build one of these things. So as a general person, that's a little bit tough to consume. As an educator, it's even more difficult. And so what we've done in my classes is built kind of a scaled down version. We call it the MVP food computer, which stands for minimum viable product. So it's the minimum amount of stuff that you need to grow plants with a Raspberry Pi in an indoor environment. So ours looks something like this, which is not as pretty. and not as fancy, but it does stuff and it grows plants. I don't know if you can see, but we're growing plants inside of this one. And this version was created by another member of the open source community, and his dad, who was like, okay, this is super cool, we're really into this, we really love agriculture, but we know that most people aren't going to spend $4,000 of their own money to buy all these different sensors to create a computer. So here's an easy version, making it modular so you can build on top of that and add different things. If you figure out, okay, we also want to add in something that measured carbon dioxide, we also want to add in something that measures the light. So we build these in my class, and this is kind of what this end looks like. This is the main portion of it. So as you saw on the previous slide, we have like a foam box that's basically made from like home insulation to essentially try to insulate the inside of the food computer so it remains the temperature that we want it to. You saw the red and blue, essentially purple lights that are coming up to mimic sunlight for the plants to grow. We also have an acrylic window on the front so that you can see your veggies growing as they grow. And then we get to the good stuff. So we have it all running with a Raspberry Pi that's connected to a breadboard and a tea cobbler, which then is connected to a temperature sensor, which you can't see because we're obviously measuring the temperature inside the box, but I'll show it in the next slide. And then it's connected to a relay, which is connected to the grow light and to a fan, which helps kind of regulate the temperature inside of this box. I have an electrical extension to plug in all of this stuff, and then we have an air pump that's not actually connected to the Raspberry Pi, but it's essential for the plant's growth. It's the same thing that you put in like an aquarium tank with the bubbles, and that brings oxygen into the plant so that the roots essentially don't drown. So this is super cool. We put all this together and end up with something like this. Like this. And so here, each food computer holds 10 plants, essentially. So this is 10 heads of lettuce. You can see the temperature sensor is right there, measuring the temperature. And then we can kind of see what is a product of this technology and eat this and do other cool things. And the cool thing about this, because it's relatively simple to do, the students get to do all of this by themselves. So, as I mentioned, we use foam to build these boxes, so they cut everything up. We also use mylar on the inside to basically have a better reflection of the light so that the plants get more light inside of this box. They get to use power tools, but we also make sure that things are being done relatively simply. So we use zip ties and tape and glue to put everything together. There's nothing super complicated about it. Lots of room for messing up. If you don't tape everything enough, everything might fall through because the basins have water in them, which has happened once or twice. But it's a cool learning experience for the students, and it's cool for them to be able to figure out, okay, we need to kind of monitor all these things and make sure all the cords fit everywhere. So once we've kind of made the food computer frame, we also go into some Raspberry Pi lessons and some Python and learn about how to connect all these things. So here they're connecting the relay to the fan and eventually to the lights. So you get an understanding of how this technology comes into play in doing this. And so at the end, they get these food computers, and one of the things that students usually say is they're surprised at how fast it takes. So we have 1 hour class periods, and it usually takes 7 class periods to kind of put everything all together. And at the end, they get this really cool thing with a cool light on it that we can put plants inside. So the students are always really surprised at how fast it took, how easy it was, and how fun it was. And so in doing this all, as I mentioned, we build the food computer frame and I try to bake in like the Raspberry Pi and Python parts in the middle of it. So this is a science class, it's not a computer science class, but as we know, computer science is super important, so like what you're talking about. So what I try to do is instead of focusing directly on the coding, directly on what Raspberry Pi does essentially, is to say, okay, these are all the things that we're going to be talking about in the class. Why is automating stuff important in this aspect? So I'll kind of go through a little bit about how the class structure runs. So initially we talk about plant science, we talk about agriculture, different types, so soil versus hydroponics, and stuff like that, and then talk about urban agriculture, because we're in a city, so why is agriculture important in an area when you might not even have land? Then we talk about food computers and automation, how automation is important and how can it help plants grow better. Then we start to build the frame of the food computers to get an idea of, okay, we have this thing, we're going to start building on top of it, adding technology. And then finally, we get to the Raspberry Pi, the Python part. We do some basic lessons in like how to turn on and off a light, how to take a photo, make an animated GIF, and then talk more about how we can apply this to the food computer and how do we use Python code to grow the plants in general. So as I mentioned, the code that we're using is open source, so we don't necessarily write the code that controls everything, but in doing this, I think students get a better idea of how to translate what that open source code is, get an understanding of how that's applied, and get an understanding of how they don't necessarily need to create everything from the ground up. Like, you do need to know certain skills, and you do need to understand what Python is and how certain things work. But if someone's already created something, you can also take that and use it, or you can take it and build on top of it. You don't have to create something from the ground up. So once we've done this, we put the plants in the food computer, set everything up, and watch the plants grow. So a little bit more about how I kind of bring in that computer science aspect of it. As I mentioned, we talk a lot about plant science at the beginning, before we start talking about computer science. So I start off by saying, okay, we know about agriculture, we know about plant science. So pretend we have a blank slate. Pretend we have this black box of nothing in it. So what elements, what elements do we need to bring in here to grow plants? So we have nothing in here. Students say things like sunlight, obviously, we need water, we need nutrients, whether that's in soil, whether that's in some sort of water mixture. So okay, we have all these things together, and now that we have all of our ingredients, essentially, how do these things need to interact with each other? What's the directions we need to tell this environment to grow the plants? So essentially, we're writing the computer code that's going to be controlling the food computer. So to say, do we need the sun to be on the plants directly for 24 hours a day? Do we need the nutrients in there for only a second? Start to think through what that pseudocode is, what that process is to grow plants, and then translate that and look at the open source code and see, oh, okay, yeah, we figured out we only need the light on for these amount of hours. This is how we're going to put it in the cron scheduler and make sure the plants only go on and off when we need them. And so then, once we've figured out kind of how the food computer works and how we can connect these things all together, I try to make sure that they get more of a round picture of what that means in general in their lives. So have them research things like Python plus something they're interested in, Raspberry Pi plus something they're interested in. So they'll find things like the Nintendo Raspberry Pi, like automated pet feeders, like GPS trackers, and start to think more about, okay, how do I use this in things outside of the classroom? Which is super cool for them to get like a broader understanding of that. And then to take it one step further, for them to understand how they can use this in their life past the classroom, past their personal preferences. How can they use this to do something in potentially a job later? How can they use this in potentially something to help their neighborhood or to help their classmates? So we started to think about how can we use this where we live. So we're based in Baltimore, Maryland, in the States, and we live obviously in a city. And along with all the good things that come along with living in a city, there are also a lot of challenges about living in a city. One of those things is food deserts, which means there are areas where people don't have regular access to grocery stores, don't have regular access to healthy, fresh fruits and vegetables. They don't have good public transport, high poverty levels. So if we look at a map of Baltimore, close up, all these red shaded areas, all are food deserts. And so a lot of my students are living in food deserts, so they understand internally like what that means to not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and how that affects life. There are a lot of health determinants that come after that. And so what I do in my classes is say, we know that this is a problem, and we know that we are semi-experts in food computers and urban agriculture and Raspberry Pi. So how can we combine what we've learned in our class and combine that with what we know about living in Baltimore City in general? And what does that mean for us? Like, how can we use that to do something about it with something that we have control over? So obviously we can't build a grocery store, but we can do other things. So in order to kind of figure that out, we do user interviews in their community. So they go out and ask their parents, their friends, their families, what do you guys know about technology? What do you know about urban agriculture? What do you know about nutrition in general? And then we regroup and kind of figure out what are the general trends of things. So students will say things like, okay, we asked everyone about what's your favorite thing about agriculture? No one knew anything about agriculture. Or we ask, how do you use technology? And everyone will only say, I use the internet, or I use a phone. And so by piecing these things together, we get an understanding of how people think about technology and agriculture and how they can potentially use their expertise in making better solutions to help solve problems like food deserts. And so one of the solutions that people came up with is Things like, okay, we rent out an old school bus, we put a bunch of food computers inside. What if we drove around to different neighborhoods and sold produce in these places where people don't have regular access to grocery stores? Or having after-school cooking classes with families so that they can all cook together and understand what it means to use agriculture that's freshly produced in a classroom. And one of the things that I think is the coolest thing we've done in the class is kind of take this one step further and help them realize how they can actually implement these plans that they've decided that they want to do. And what we did was build what we call a food computer room. And so this is in the basement of our school. And we basically took it over, and essentially it is a bunch of our small food computers put together in one continuous thing. So there's a bunch of water over here that's pumped up and flows through the entire system. In each one of these basins is plants, and the lights are controlled by Raspberry Pi. The temperature is semi-controlled by Raspberry Pi because, as you see, it's like not a super enclosed area. There are only 3 Raspberry Pis that are connected to 3 fans. So it's not super regulated, but it does work in growing plants, and students get to do a lot of cool stuff with it. So this, I think, helps bring that, okay, we built this box. Now if we're trying to implement this in real life, what does that mean? If we can grow enough food for everyone in our grade level to eat lunch for every other week or something like that, how do we start to think about problems that we can initiate to start solving problems? But this also wasn't a super easy process. The initial one that we made looked like this, which looks the same, but it was a total failure. The bin plastic was too thin, and the plastic basically cracked everywhere, and they were too shallow. So when we first put all this together and tested the system, water flew out of all the bins. It was leaking out of everything. The rafts that we used to put the plants on didn't fit because when you have water weighing down a thin plastic basin, they changed shape, so they didn't fit on top. So the students were kind of upset. They're like, oh, this is a failure. Like, we can't do this anymore. But I think that kind of worked in our favor. And I don't know how to necessarily bring this into classes on purpose, but empowering students to make mistakes, I think, helped them figure out, okay, this is a real thing, this is a real failure, but it kind of worked, so we can probably figure out a solution to make it actually work really well. So we regrouped. We're basically like, okay, we just need taller basins, we need thicker plastic, we need to have a little bit more plan in terms of making this thing out. And so we ended up with this, grew a lot of plants with it. These are some peas that we had that kind of took over the entire food computer room, which we also didn't plan for, but had to figure out how to make a trellis for them to all grow on top of. And I think the students really enjoyed this whole aspect of seeing everything come to life. And then after this, obviously we have a bunch of plants, so we got to do a lot of cooking. So we grew a lot of herbs, so here's some basil and mint, I think, and parsley in there somewhere. We did some lessons on how to make different pasta dishes, how to make omelets, and so kind of bringing this whole thing full circle and saying, okay, we learned about plant science, we learned about Raspberry Pi, we built a food computer, we put it in this whole system, now you're eating it, what does that mean? You've created this thing, now understand why this is all important, and figure out think more broadly about what you can do with computer science and stuff in the future. So this is my class. I'm super proud of them. They did a lot of work over this year and had zero experience in plant science, zero experience in computer science going into this, and basically created all these really cool things. And so the thing that we're working on this semester moving forward is implementing a solution that they really want to do based on their expertise in the class. So in doing all these interviews, in building out this food computer room that we had, their favorite thing was being able to create this whole system by themselves and to eat the plants at the end. So what we're doing and devising a plan for is having them take this and teach it to younger kids, because they felt like they learned a lot over the year. They had a lot of fun building this stuff, and they had a lot of fun figuring out how to navigate this whole urban agriculture, computer-controlled world. But they had never been exposed to it before. So they're all 15, 16 years old. And they're like, this would have been really cool if we could have learned about stuff like this when we were in 5th grade, elementary school age, so that as we go through other classes, we get a better idea of how this is applicable and why we're in these science classes in the first place. So their plan, based on different things that the students like, so some students liked the coding part better, some students liked the construction part better, Some students feel like they have a really strong voice and want to portray what they've learned and why it's important to other schools. And so we've kind of separated them into groups, and they're working on developing like a business kind of thing as a mission statement and a vision to sell this to elementary school kids and say, we want to come do lessons for your elementary schools during some of your class periods and teach this and build this with your schools so that not only will your students have access to this, but also be able to participate and understand what agriculture is and have growing plants in their room all the time. So yeah, I'm super proud of them. This has been a really fun project that we've done the whole year. And I think if there's one thing that I can leave you with is to try and figure out, okay, yes, computer science is important, and I'm sure everyone is from different backgrounds and teaching different types of classes and like physics and all this other stuff. So how can we take this and bring this more to a real life thing and make students feel like they can do stuff and make a positive impact in the world with computer science? So this is my contact information. I'd love to, if any of you guys are interested in doing stuff like this, love to help out. As I mentioned, it's all open source, so you can probably Google OpenAg Food Computer online. You can find their GitHub if you need help in figuring out how to implement stuff like this in your classes. I'd be more than happy to help and talk about different things that we've talked about in my classes. So, thanks. Sorry, if you haven't, yeah?
Your student, have you ever visited the MIT Media Lab?
Not yet. So we're in Baltimore, they're in Boston, and so we've talked, but we haven't actually been able to visit them.
You should visit.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out a way, because they might come to see our school, we might go there. So
2 years ago, I saw this project in the MIT Lab.
Oh,
Yes. This
cool.
is like this.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
the same.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Awesome.
What were the biggest technical challenges you faced? Were there any things you could have, where more tech or more technical things could have helped you?
I think one of the things that was challenging was the amount of Raspberry Pi we had to introduce the concept to the students. So initially I had them work in groups of 4 people to kind of figure out how to do certain things, but as we know, having a group of 4 people trying to code is really 1 person coding and 3 people watching. So what we've done this year is invested in some PyTalk seeds for the students so that we can all do stuff at the same time and get a better foundation for how to do stuff. But I think that was one of the challenging things, is making sure that all the students really understood what the Raspberry Pi stuff was before we went on to the next step. But we're trying to backstep and make that better going on. Yeah?
This is maybe, see the server room thing? Did you find that, so the water was flowing like that, did you find that the ones down here grew worse than the ones up there? Was the water circulating, or was it pure water? I'm just curious,
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think, so there's 2 things that are, so the water is circulating more, I think, on the top ones, and the lights are different on the bottom, because we got some of these lights donated and then bought some of them. So there are 2 different sources of lights. I think the plants that grew in the middle grew the best out of all of them, but I'm not quite sure. We haven't really dove into why that is, but maybe that's a good thing for students to look into in the future.
For now, how much is the electricity bill for this?
I don't know, actually. Don't know the answer, but I can find out. Yeah.
Did you have any problems getting it past health and safety within, if that's in the basement of why you're not?
Not really. So it's not, we're not offering the food during a lunchtime, because it's a tutorial in class. There's not as many regulations on how to, I don't know, what kind of food safety things need to go
I was
around
just
it.
thinking with electricity and water in the basement of a school.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we regularly monitor it as people, so we haven't had any problems yet. But yeah, it's probably something to look into.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.